I'm Eleanor, 68 years old and still sharp as a tack. Our family road trip to the Grand Canyon was supposed to be a chance to reconnect with my son Franklin, his wife Kimberly, and my precious grandchildren. Instead, I found myself abandoned at a desolate rest stop in the Arizona desert, watching their car disappear into the horizon. Little did they know that one phone call would change everything. Before I tell you how I destroyed my son's career, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself when family betrays you. Life hasn't been the same since I lost Harold, my husband of 42 years, to cancer 5 years ago. We'd built a beautiful life together, raised our son Franklin with all the love and opportunity we could provide, and looked forward to a retirement filled with grandchildren and leisure. Harold's death left a void that seemed impossible to fill, but I tried to stay strong and independent, just as he would have wanted. Franklin had always been our pride and joy. As a child, he was bright, curious, and affectionate. I still remember how he'd run into the kitchen after school, eager to show me his artwork or tell me about what he'd learned that day. I was the one who drove him to soccer practice, helped with science fair projects, and stayed up late consoling him after his first heartbreak. We had the kind of close mother-son relationship that I thought would last forever. That bond began to change when Franklin met Kimberly during his final year of architecture school. She was beautiful, ambitious, and came from a wealthy family. Everything Franklin aspired to. I tried to welcome her with open arms, inviting her to family dinners and including her in holiday traditions. But from the beginning, there was a coolness to her that I couldn't penetrate. "You're so traditional, Eleanor," she once said, declining my offer to teach her Harold's cherished family recipes. "Franklin and I are more into fusion cuisine and clean eating now." After their wedding, Franklin landed a prestigious position at Thompson and Barrett Architects, one of the most respected firms in the state. It was his dream job, designing innovative commercial spaces under the mentorship of Richard Barrett himself. Franklin worked long hours to prove himself, and I understood when visits became less frequent. Success required sacrifice. Harold and I had taught him that. The grandchildren arrived, James, now 12, and Melissa, 9. And I hoped they would bridge whatever growing distance I felt. I sent thoughtful gifts, offered to babysit, and created photo albums documenting their milestones. But my time with them was always supervised, always scheduled, always somehow cut short. "Mom, we have our own parenting style," Franklin would explain when I suggested overnight visits. "Kids need consistency." I began noticing how Kimberly would whisper to Franklin when I made suggestions about the children, how his expression would shift from warm to guarded after these exchanges. Phone calls went unanswered for days. Invitations were declined with vague excuses. When we did gather, conversations were superficial, controlled. "The children are too busy for regular visits," Kimberly would say. "Piano lessons, coding camp, language immersion. They're getting advantages we want them to have." Advantages that apparently didn't include knowing their grandmother. The loneliness after these encounters was almost worse than not seeing them at all. I'd return to my empty house, surrounded by family photos from happier times, wondering what I'd done wrong. I joined community groups, volunteered at the local library, made new friends, but nothing filled the hole left by my increasingly distant family. I watched through social media as they took vacations, celebrated birthdays, created memories, often learning about these events only after they happened. The few comments I left received polite but minimal acknowledgement. I was becoming a spectator in my own family's life. "Give them space," my friend Judith advised. "They'll come around when they need you." But the space between us seemed to grow wider with each passing month, and I began to wonder if they'd ever need me again. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in early June. I was watering my garden, enjoying the summer blooms that Harold had once carefully planted, when Franklin's name flashed on my phone screen. I nearly dropped the watering can in my rush to answer. "Mom," he said, sounding more animated than I'd heard in months. "We're planning a road trip to the Grand Canyon next week. The whole family. We thought you might want to join us." I sat down on the garden bench, stunned by this unexpected olive branch. "Really? You want me to come along?" I asked, trying to keep the desperate hope out of my voice. "Sure," Franklin replied. "The kids were just saying they haven't seen Grandma in a while. It'll be good for everyone." My heart soared. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for, uninterrupted days together, sharing new experiences, rebuilding our bonds away from the distractions of everyday life. I immediately began planning, making lists of things to pack, shopping for small gifts for James and Melissa, even buying a new digital camera to document our adventure. "This is your chance," my friend Donna encouraged during our weekly coffee date. "Just be yourself, and they'll remember how much they love having you around." I arrived at Franklin's suburban home on Monday morning, laden with carefully packed bags and a heart full of expectations. Kimberly answered the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Eleanor, you're early," she said, stepping back to let me in. "We're still getting things organized." The house was chaotic with half-packed suitcases and the children running around. James barely looked up from his handheld game console to mumble a greeting. Melissa gave me a quick, obligatory hug before returning to an argument with her mother about which toys she could bring. As I set my bags by the door, I overheard Franklin and Kimberly speaking in hushed tones in the kitchen. "I told you this was a bad idea," Kimberly whispered. "Now we'll have to deal with her the entire trip." "Just stick to the plan," Franklin replied. "It's only a few days." My hands trembled as I pretended to organize my purse. "Deal with me." "What plan?" I considered confronting them, asking for an explanation, or even making an excuse to back out of the trip. But the thought of returning to my empty house, of missing this chance with my grandchildren, kept me silent. "We're taking 2 cars," Franklin announced when he emerged from the kitchen. "Mom, you'll ride with Kimberly and the kids. I need to make some work calls, so I'll drive alone." This seemed odd. Surely his work calls could wait, or he could pull over if needed. But I nodded agreeably, determined not to cause friction before we'd even left the driveway. The first day's drive was tense. Kimberly kept the radio tuned to stations the children liked, discouraging conversation. When I tried to engage James about his recent science fair project that I'd seen pictures of online, he gave one-word answers before returning to his game. Melissa was slightly more receptive, showing me her collection of travel stickers, but even she pulled away when Kimberly shot her a look in the rearview mirror. We stopped at a motel in Eastern California that first night. At dinner, I tried to share stories about Franklin's childhood adventures, thinking the children might enjoy hearing about their father as a boy. "Mom, those stories are so embarrassing," Franklin interrupted. "Nobody wants to hear about the time I got stuck in the treehouse." "Ido," Melissa piped up, but was quickly shushed by her mother. "We need to discuss tomorrow's itinerary," Kimberly said, effectively closing down my attempt at connection. In bed that night, in my separate room across the hall from my family's adjoining rooms, I heard laughter through the walls. They sounded happy, relaxed. So different from the strained atmosphere when I was present. I fell asleep with tears on my pillow, wondering if this trip had been a terrible mistake. Still, I woke the next morning with renewed determination. The Grand Canyon was only a day's drive away. Surely the majesty of nature, the shared experience of seeing one of the world's wonders together, would help bridge the distance between us. I put on my brightest smile and most comfortable walking shoes, ready to make the most of day 2. "Did you bring your medication, Mom?" Franklin asked at breakfast, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You know how you get when you forget it." I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. I took only a mild blood pressure medication, hardly something that affected my behavior, and Franklin knew it. This public reference to my health seemed deliberately designed to paint me as frail or unstable. "I've got everything I need," I replied calmly, refusing to take the bait. "I'm looking forward to today's drive." As we continued our journey through the desert, I made mental notes of interesting landmarks to point out to the children, researched the history of towns we passed through, even prepared a few card games we could play. Most of my efforts were met with polite indifference or outright rejection. "The kids don't need entertainment," Kimberly said when I suggested a counting game. "They have their tablets." By the time we crossed into Arizona, I had retreated into silence, watching the harsh beauty of the desert landscape roll by and wondering what had happened to the son I raised. Had I somehow failed him? Was there something fundamental about me that Kimberly found so objectionable? Or was I simply an inconvenient reminder of Franklin's more humble beginnings, now that he had ascended to the life of prosperity and status he shared with her? These painful questions circled in my mind as we approached the rest stop that would change everything. "We'll stop here for a bathroom break," Kimberly announced, pulling into a remote rest area somewhere in the Arizona desert. It was just past noon, and the summer sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty parking lot. A small concrete building housed the restrooms, with a few weathered picnic tables scattered under metal awnings that provided the only shade. Beyond the rest area, nothing but red desert and distant mountains stretched to the horizon. Franklin, who had been driving ahead of us, was already parked. He stepped out of his car, stretching and checking his phone. 15 minutes, everyone," he called as the children tumbled out of our vehicle. "We need to make good time if we want to reach the canyon before sunset." The rest stop was eerily quiet, with only 2 other cars present: an old RV with an elderly couple setting up lunch at a picnic table, and a dusty pickup truck whose owner was nowhere in sight. A single vending machine stood against the building, its glass front so sun-damaged that the products inside were barely visible. "I need to use the restroom," I told Kimberly, who was applying fresh sunscreen to Melissa's nose. "Fine, but don't take forever," she replied without looking up. "It's too hot to stand around waiting." The restroom was as unwelcoming as one might expect in such a remote location. No air conditioning, bare concrete floors, and the persistent drone of flies. Still, it was a necessary stop after hours on the road. I took my time, washing my hands thoroughly and freshening up a bit, mindful of the intense heat we'd be facing when we resumed our journey. I experienced a slight dizzy spell as I was leaving the stall. Nothing serious, just the brief lightheadedness that occasionally troubled me since starting new blood pressure medication. I steadied myself against the sink for a moment, took a deep breath, and splashed some cool water on my face. The episode passed quickly, but it had delayed me by a few extra minutes. When I finally emerged from the restroom, squinting in the bright sunlight, I looked toward where our cars had been parked. The space was empty. I blinked, confused, then turned in a full circle, scanning the small parking lot. Franklin's sleek black SUV and Kimberly's silver minivan were nowhere to be seen. "They must have moved to get some shade," I murmured to myself, walking toward the picnic area. But the elderly couple were the only people there, quietly eating sandwiches under the metal awning. A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. I pulled out my cell phone to call Franklin, only to see no service displayed across the top of the screen. Of course, we were in the middle of nowhere. "Excuse me," I approached the elderly couple, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did you happen to see where the family I was with went?" A man, woman, and 2 children. The man, who introduced himself as George, looked uncomfortable. His wife Martha exchanged a glance with him before answering me. "They drove off about 5 minutes ago," she said gently. "We assumed you were meeting them somewhere else." "Drove off," I repeated, not quite processing her words. "Both cars? You must be mistaken." George cleared his throat. "I'm afraid not, ma'am. We noticed because—" He hesitated. "Because they were laughing," Martha finished. The children were looking back through the window, laughing. We thought it was strange, but figured it must be some kind of joke. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had left me, deliberately, in a remote desert rest stop with no cell service, no transportation, and few passing travelers. My own son, his wife, and even my grandchildren had driven away laughing, leaving their elderly mother and grandmother behind in the scorching heat. I sank onto the bench opposite George and Martha, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The temperature had to be over 100 degrees, and I had only a small bottle of water in my purse. My luggage, medication, most of my money. Everything was in Kimberly's car. "Are you all right?" Martha asked, moving to sit beside me. "You've gone quite pale." "I don't understand," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "Why would they do this? Do you think they might circle back?" George suggested. "Could be some misguided prank?" I waited, hoping desperately that Franklin would return, perhaps with some incomprehensible explanation that would make sense of this cruelty. Minutes stretched into an hour. The relentless sun moved across the sky. No familiar vehicles appeared on the empty highway. Another car pulled into the rest stop, a young couple with a baby. I approached them immediately, asking if I could use their phone to make a call. They seemed wary of the distraught older woman approaching their vehicle, but the young mother reluctantly handed me her phone. Franklin's number went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice shaking. "Franklin, it's Mom. Where are you? Why did you leave me at the rest stop? Please come back immediately." I tried Kimberly's phone with the same result. The young family couldn't wait long. Their baby was fussing in the heat, and they needed to reach their destination. They offered to call for help when they reached the next town, but couldn't take me with them as their car was already packed to capacity with baby equipment. As they drove away, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was alone in one of the most inhospitable environments in America, with limited resources and no immediate way out. My own family had deliberately put me in danger, treating me with a callousness I couldn't fathom. The heat was becoming unbearable, even in the shade of the awning. I felt the early signs of dehydration, thirst, headache, dizziness. I sipped sparingly from my water bottle, knowing I needed to make it last. "You can't stay here," Martha said firmly. "It's not safe. The temperature will drop dramatically after sunset, and there are coyotes and other wildlife." "We're heading east," George added. "We can take you to the next town. It's about 70 miles. There's a motel there, and you can figure out your next steps." I hesitated, reluctant to admit that my family wasn't coming back for me, that this wasn't some terrible misunderstanding. But as the afternoon wore on with no sign of Franklin or Kimberly, I had to accept the painful truth. "Thank you," I finally said to George and Martha. "I would appreciate a ride." As I climbed into their RV, leaving the rest stop behind, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, a raw wound that seemed to throb with each beat of my heart. But alongside it, something else was growing. A slow-burning anger that would soon consume my sadness and transform it into something else entirely. The RV rumbled down the highway, air conditioning providing blessed relief from the desert heat. George kept his eyes on the road while Martha sat with me at their small dining table, pressing a cup of cold water into my hands. My fingers were still trembling. "I'm trying to make sense of it," I said, more to myself than to Martha. "What kind of people leave an elderly woman alone at a rest stop in the desert?" Martha's kind face showed both sympathy and disbelief. "I can't imagine. My children would never." She trailed off, perhaps realizing that until today, I would have said the same thing. "How long have you been having problems with them?" George asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. The question made me pause. Had there been warning signs I'd ignored? The whispered conversations, the canceled visits, the way Franklin's expression would change after Kimberly spoke to him. I'd attributed it all to normal family tensions, to a daughter-in-law establishing boundaries, to a son busy with his career and children. "Things have been strained since my husband died," I admitted. "But this? I never imagined they could be so cruel." Martha reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Some people show their true colors when inheritance and eldercare enter the picture," she said softly. "We've seen it with friends." The implication struck me like a thunderbolt. Had Franklin and Kimberly been pushing me away because they saw me as a burden? A financial obligation? An inconvenience to their perfectly curated life? "I'm completely independent," I protested. "I have my own home, my own money. I've never asked them for anything." "But they might worry about the future," George suggested. "People can convince themselves of all sorts of things to justify selfish behavior." As we drove, I tried Franklin's phone again from Martha's cell. Still straight to voicemail. I left another message, my voice stronger this time. "Franklin, what you've done is dangerous and cruel. I'm safe no thanks to you. We need to talk about what happened today." The landscape outside the window was beautiful in its stark, unforgiving way. Red rock formations, distant mountains, occasional clusters of resilient desert plants. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated its wild beauty. Now it just reminded me of how vulnerable I had been. How easily I could have become another tragedy in this merciless environment. "Do you know what you'll do next?" Martha asked gently. I hadn't thought that far ahead. My mind was still processing the immediate trauma, the betrayal. My luggage was in Kimberly's car. My house keys were in my suitcase. My emergency credit card was in my toiletry bag. I had my purse with my driver's license, primary credit card, and about $60 in cash, enough for immediate needs, but not enough to get home from the middle of Arizona. I need to get to a hotel, I said finally, then figure out how to get home. You should file a police report, George suggested. What they did could be considered elder abandonment. It's a crime in most states. The thought of pressing charges against my own son made my stomach clench. Despite everything, some instinct to protect him still lingered. But George was right. What Franklin and Kimberly had done wasn't just cruel. It was potentially criminal. As the sun began to set, we reached a small town little more than a main street with a gas station, diner, and the promised motel. George and Martha insisted on helping me check in, making sure I had a safe place before they continued their journey. Here's our phone number and email, Martha said, writing on the motel notepad. Please let us know you're okay once you get home, and if you need anything at all. I hugged them both, these strangers who had shown more care for my welfare than my own family. I can't thank you enough. Take care of yourself, Eleanor, George said. And remember, you deserve better than how they treated you. After they left, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the events of the day crashing over me in waves. The room was clean but basic: floral bedspreads, laminate furniture, a TV that probably still had actual channels instead of streaming services. Under normal circumstances, it would have been forgettable. Tonight it was sanctuary. I tried Franklin's number again. Voicemail. This time I didn't leave a message. I took a long shower, washing away the desert dust and dried tears. As the water ran over me, my mind began to clear. The shock was fading, making room for other emotions. Anger, indignation, resolve. What if I had been a less capable person? What if I hadn't had my purse with me? What if George and Martha hadn't been there? What if I'd had a medical emergency in that heat? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that what Franklin and Kimberly had done wasn't just mean-spirited. It was potentially deadly. After my shower, I ordered delivery from the diner across the street. As I ate my club sandwich alone in the motel room, I began to formulate a plan. Not just for getting home. That was relatively straightforward now that I was in civilization with working phones and my credit card. No, I needed a plan for what came after. For how I would respond to this betrayal. I wouldn't let it stand. For too long, I had been passive in the face of their increasing disrespect. I had made excuses, blamed myself, accepted less than I deserved out of fear of losing what little connection remained. That ended today. Franklin needed to understand that actions have consequences. Kimberly needed to learn that I wasn't as powerless as she thought. And my grandchildren needed to know that treating people this way, especially family, especially the elderly, was never acceptable. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan slowly rotating above me, I remembered something Harold used to say. Stand up for yourself, Ellie, or no one else will. My dear husband had always been my backbone when my own failed me. Now it was time to be my own advocate. Tomorrow, I would begin the journey home. And then, I would make that phone call. The one that would change everything. Saturday arrived, and with it, a sense of foreboding I couldn't shake. I dressed carefully in one of my nicer outfits, a blue blouse Robert had always complimented and gray slacks. I wanted to feel confident for whatever awaited me. I arrived at Douglas and Alicia's home precisely at 6, noting that my old parking spot was now occupied by another new vehicle, a sports car I didn't recognize. More evidence of their financial hardship. Alicia greeted me with a forced smile, already holding a glass of wine that didn't appear to be her first of the evening. The house smelled of roasting chicken, and soft music played in the background. The scene was meticulously set, like actors on a stage preparing for a performance. Tyler ran to hug me, genuine happiness on his face. "Grandma, I'm so glad you came. Dad made me wear this stupid tie," he whispered, tugging at the formal attire that seemed excessive for a family dinner. Douglas emerged from his study, all smiles and warmth. "Mom!" "Right on time. Come sit down. Dinner's almost ready." Throughout the meal, Douglas and Alicia maintained a performance of perfect domesticity. They asked about my garden, my volunteer work, my friends, topics they'd never shown interest in before. Tyler remained quiet, watching his parents with suspicious eyes. After dessert, Douglas cleared his throat. Tyler, why don't you go upstairs and finish that science project? But I finished it yesterday, Tyler protested. Then start on your math homework, Alicia said sharply. Tyler looked at me helplessly before trudging upstairs. Once we heard his bedroom door close, Douglas leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. Mom, we've been thinking about your living situation. My living situation? I repeated cautiously. Yes, that big house all to yourself. All that maintenance. It must be overwhelming at your age. I bristled at the implication. I manage just fine, Douglas. Of course you do, Alicia jumped in, her voice syrupy. But wouldn't it be nicer to be around family? To have help when you need it? What exactly are you suggesting? I asked, though I was beginning to see where this was heading. Douglas smiled broadly. We want you to sell your house and move in with us. We have that guest suite downstairs. It would be perfect for you. Private but close enough that we could check on you. And Tyler would love having you here, Alicia added, though her eyes remained cold. That's very thoughtful, I said carefully. But I'm happy in my home. All my memories with your father are there. Douglas's smile faltered. Mom, be practical. You're not getting any younger. What if you fall? What if you need help in the middle of the night? I have a medical alert system and neighbors who check on me, I countered. Judith right next door. Judith is nearly as old as you are, Douglas scoffed. What help would she be in an emergency? I felt my temper rising but kept my voice level. What would happen to the proceeds from selling my house? A flicker of something, greed? Anticipation? Crossed Douglas's face before he composed himself. We'd invest it for you, of course. I have an excellent opportunity right now that would generate significant returns. Another investment opportunity? I asked skeptically. Like the one that led you to need $175,000 of my money? Douglas's face hardened. That was different. This is a sure thing. No investment is a sure thing, Douglas. Your father taught you that. Dad was overly cautious, Douglas dismissed. He could have done so much more with his money if he'd been willing to take risks. Your father provided for us comfortably and left me secure in my retirement. I'd hardly call that a failure. Douglas leaned forward, dropping the friendly pretense. Look, Mom, I'm trying to help you here. Property taxes in Austin are skyrocketing. Maintenance costs on an older home like yours add up. You're sitting on an asset that's not working for you. My home is working perfectly for me by providing me a place to live, I replied evenly. Alicia intervened, placing her hand over mine in a gesture that felt invasive rather than comforting. Margaret, we're family. We want what's best for you. And for Tyler. Your home could provide opportunities for his future. College, investments in his name. I pulled my hand away. So this isn't about my welfare at all. It's about getting access to my house. Don't be dramatic, Douglas snapped. We're offering you a place to live, care in your old age. Most people would be grateful. Most people wouldn't have given their son $160,000 without a written agreement, I countered. Speaking of which, when can I expect my first repayment? The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Douglas's face flushed with anger, while Alicia's expression became stone cold. This offer is your repayment, Douglas said through gritted teeth. A place to live, care, security. That wasn't our agreement, Douglas. You promised to repay me in cash with interest. Plans change, he said dismissively. This is a better arrangement for everyone. Not for me, I stated firmly. I'm declining your offer. I'll stay in my home, and I expect you to begin repaying me as promised. Douglas slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes rattle. You're being selfish and short-sighted. Douglas, Alicia hissed. Control yourself. But Douglas was beyond listening. He stood up, looming over me. After everything we've done for you, inviting you to family events, letting you see Tyler? And you can't do this one thing to help secure your grandson's future. I've already helped plenty, I said, rising to my feet as well. And I haven't seen a penny in return, or even a word of genuine gratitude. Gratitude? Douglas laughed bitterly. For what? For doing what any mother would do. For fulfilling your basic obligation to your family. Obligation? I echoed, incredulous. There was no obligation to give you my retirement savings, Douglas. That was a choice I made out of love. Love you're now trying to exploit further. Alicia stood as well, her voice sharp. You're being unreasonable, Margaret. Douglas is trying to create a win-win situation. The only people winning in this scenario are you two, I replied. And I suspect you've already spent the money you imagine you'd get from my house. Douglas's face contorted with rage. You know what? Fine. Stay in your precious house. Rot there alone for all I care. Douglas. Alicia cautioned, glancing toward the stairs. But Douglas was beyond restraint now. You think you're so self-sufficient? So independent? You're just a selfish old woman who cares more about her things than her family's future. Dad would be ashamed of you. The mention of Robert pushed me over the edge. Don't you dare speak for your father. Robert would be appalled at what you've become. Lying, manipulating, gambling away your family's security. Douglas froze. What did you say? Tyler told me everything. You lost your job months ago. You've been gambling. There was no business trip to Europe. You went to Atlantic City. Douglas's face went pale, then flushed with fury. He took a step toward me, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Just die already, I don't give a shit. You're useless to us now. The words hit me like physical blows. I staggered back, clutching the edge of the dining table for support. Get out, Douglas snarled. Get out of my house. Footsteps pounded down the stairs and Tyler appeared, his face streaked with tears. He must have been listening the whole time. Dad, stop it, he cried, running to stand between us. Don't talk to Grandma like that. Go to your room, Tyler, Alicia ordered. This doesn't concern you. Yes, it does, Tyler shouted. You're being mean to Grandma because she won't give you her house. I heard everything. Douglas grabbed Tyler's arm. Upstairs. Now. It's all right, Tyler, I said, finding my voice despite the shock. I'm leaving. But I love you very much. I gathered my purse with shaking hands and walked toward the door. Douglas made no move to stop me, his face still contorted with rage. Alicia stood with her arms crossed, her expression cold and calculating. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard Tyler break free and run toward me. Tyler! Douglas barked. Don't you dare. But Tyler had already thrown his arms around my waist. I'm sorry, Grandma, he sobbed. I'll call you, I promise. Douglas yanked him away, and I stepped out into the night, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The drive home passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. The son I had raised, the boy I had loved unconditionally, had just told me to die. That he didn't care. That I was useless. When I finally arrived home, I sat in my car in the driveway, unable to move. Eventually I called Judith, who came over immediately. She held me while I sobbed, my entire body shaking with grief. You were right, I managed between tears. I should never have gone. What did they do? Judith asked, her voice tight with concern. I told her everything. The proposal to sell my house, Douglas's fury when I refused, his cruel words. That's not your son talking, Judith said firmly. That's desperation. He's in trouble, Margaret, serious trouble. And he thought you were his way out. What do I do now? I asked, feeling more lost than I had even after Robert died. You protect yourself, Judith replied, her expression grave. Because I don't think Douglas is finished trying to get what he wants. How right she was. I just didn't realize how far my son would go to take what wasn't his. The journey home was long but cathartic. Driving through the desert landscape that had nearly become my undoing, I felt a strange sense of power growing with each mile. The rental car, a compact economy model nothing like Franklin's luxury SUV, became my chariot of independence, carrying me away from victimhood and toward something new. I arrived home late the following day, exhausted but clear-headed. My house, which had often felt too empty since Harold's passing, now seemed like a sanctuary of peace and self-determination. I showered, changed into comfortable clothes, and slept deeply for the first time since the rest stop incident. 3 days passed with no word from Franklin. My calls still went to voicemail, my texts unread. Either he was continuing to avoid me, or he and the family were still on their vacation, perhaps enjoying the Grand Canyon views without the inconvenience of my presence. The thought no longer stung as sharply as it once would have. On the fourth day my phone rang. It was Richard Barrett. "Mrs. Mitchell," he began formally, "I wanted to follow up on our conversation regarding your son." "I appreciate that, Mr. Barrett," I replied, settling into an armchair by the window. "Have you spoken with Franklin?" "Yes, at length. After our talk, I conducted some discreet inquiries among staff. What emerged was concerning. A pattern of behavior inconsistent with our firm's values. The incident with you appears to have been the culmination of deteriorating personal judgment." He paused, and I could hear him choosing his next words carefully. "We've made the decision to terminate Franklin's employment, effective immediately." The words hung in the air between us. I had never explicitly asked for Franklin to be fired. Had I? Wasn't this exactly what I had engineered with my call? "I understand," I said finally. "May I ask what Franklin's response was?" "Initially denial, then anger. He attempted to characterize the rest stop incident as a misunderstanding, and later as a prank gone wrong. Neither explanation was satisfactory, especially in light of other issues that had been brought to my attention. I thanked Richard for his call, assuring him that while I took no pleasure in the outcome, I understood the firm's position. After hanging up, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the neighborhood children play across the street, wondering when exactly my own child had lost his moral compass. The call from Franklin came less than an hour later. I answered immediately. "How could you?" he shouted, his voice so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "You called my boss? You got me fired?" "My own mother." "Franklin," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I suggest you lower your voice if you want to have this conversation. Don't you dare tell me how to speak to you after what you did. Do you have any idea what you've done? We have a mortgage, college funds, Kimberly's car payment. And do you have any idea what you did?" I countered, heat rising in my cheeks. "You abandoned me at a rest stop in the desert. No transportation, no luggage, limited water. Do you know what could have happened to me?" "It was a joke, Mom. We were coming back. We just wanted to teach you a lesson about your constant neediness, your intrusion in our lives. We drove around the block and were going to come right back. But then we saw you getting into an RV with some strangers." The lie was so blatant, so absurd that for a moment I couldn't even respond. They had not driven around the block. There was no block to drive around in the middle of the desert. The nearest town was over 70 miles away. And according to George and Martha, they had left immediately, laughing as they went. "Franklin," I said when I found my voice, "we both know that's not true. You left me there. You drove away laughing. You ignored my calls afterward. You made a deliberate choice to put me in danger because I'm an inconvenience to you." "That's not," he began, but I cut him off. "I don't want to hear any more lies. For years, I've accepted the growing distance between us. I've made excuses for missed visits, ignored snide comments, pretended not to notice when I was excluded from family events. I thought eventually you'd remember how much we once meant to each other. But after what happened at that rest stop, I realized you don't respect me as a mother, or even as a human being deserving of basic decency." There was silence on the other end. Then I heard muffled voices, Franklin and Kimberly arguing. Suddenly, Kimberly's voice came through the phone. "Listen to me, Eleanor," she said, her tone venomous. "You've gone too far. Franklin was the primary breadwinner. Do you understand what you've done to this family? To your own grandchildren?" "I understand exactly what I've done, Kimberly," I replied. "I've shown you that I won't be mistreated without consequences. Something you apparently plan to teach me in a very different way." "It was a prank," she insisted. "The kids thought it would be funny. We were teaching them about humor." The mention of my grandchildren's involvement was like a knife to my heart. "You're telling me that James and Melissa were part of planning this? They thought it would be hilarious to see Grandma get a little scare," Kimberly said, her tone suggesting I was overreacting. "Kids play pranks. It's normal. Abandoning an elderly person in a dangerous environment isn't a prank. It's cruelty, possibly criminal negligence. And teaching children that it's acceptable to treat vulnerable people that way? That's a failure of parenting. I could practically hear Kimberly seething through the phone. You self-righteous old. Franklin's voice cut in, apparently having taken the phone back. Mom, you've put us in an impossible situation. I've lost my job. We were counting on my year-end bonus for Melissa's orthodontics. The firm won't give me a reference. Do you have any idea how hard it will be to find another position in this industry after being fired for character issues? For a brief moment, I felt a stab of remorse. Had I gone too far? Then I remembered the desert heat, the isolation, the helplessness, and the laughter as they drove away. Actions have consequences, Franklin, I said quietly. Something you and Kimberly seem to have forgotten. Something I hope you'll teach your children better than you demonstrated at that rest stop. So that's it? You've destroyed my career to teach me a lesson? Congratulations, Mother. I hope it was worth it. Before I could respond, another call beeped through an unknown number. Normally I would have ignored it, but something prompted me to tell Franklin I needed to take it. Eleanor Mitchell? A man's voice asked when I answered. Yes, who's calling? My name is Thomas Delaney. I worked with your son at Thompson & Barrett. I hope you don't mind, but Richard Barrett gave me your number. I wanted to thank you. Thank me, I repeated, confused, for coming forward about Franklin's behavior. It validated some concerns many of us have had. Franklin has been taking credit for other people's work for years, including mine. He's bullied junior staff, manipulated project assignments, even altered documents to make colleagues look bad. But no one wanted to speak up because he was Barrett's protege. I sank into my chair, stunned by this revelation. I had no idea. Most people didn't outside the firm. He's very careful about his public image. When Barrett told us why Franklin was let go, the broad strokes at least, it was like a weight lifted from the entire office. Several of us wanted you to know that. After thanking Thomas and ending the call, I sat in silence, processing this new information. The son I thought I knew, had raised to be honest, hardworking, and kind, had apparently become someone else entirely. Not just to me, but to everyone. Had my call to Richard Barrett simply been the catalyst for an overdue reckoning? Had I unknowingly exposed not just a single incident of cruelty, but a pattern of behavior that had been harming others for years? Perhaps the consequences Franklin now faced weren't just for abandoning me in the desert, but for the person he had allowed himself to become. 6 months passed. The desert incident, as I'd come to think of it, had faded from a raw wound to a dull ache, still present, but no longer dominating my every thought. Autumn had given way to winter, and now the first tentative signs of spring were appearing in my garden, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil toward the light. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Franklin had found new employment, not with a prestigious architectural firm, but with a small commercial construction company, drafting rather than designing. A significant step down from his former position, both in status and compensation. Kimberly had taken a part-time job at a high-end boutique to help make ends meet. They'd sold one of their cars and canceled the children's expensive summer camps. I felt no joy in their struggles, only a sense of somber justice. Actions had indeed had consequences, just as I'd said they would. The first tentative outreach came in January. A text message from Franklin on my birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you're well. No mention of the desert, no apology, but a small crack in the wall of silence that had stood between us since our phone confrontation. I'd responded with equal brevity. Thank you, Franklin. I hope you and the family are finding your way. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an acknowledgement that the door wasn't permanently closed. In February, he suggested meeting for coffee, just the two of us. I agreed with trepidation and a small cautious hope. We met at a neutral location, a cafe halfway between our homes. Franklin looked older, the confident gleam in his eye replaced by something more subdued. He'd lost weight, and his designer clothes had been replaced by more modest attire. Mom, he began, after awkward greetings and small talk about the weather. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I waited, neither encouraging nor discouraging his words. What happened at the rest stop? He paused, seemingly struggling with what to say next. It was wrong. Inexcusably wrong. I've spent months trying to understand how I could have done something so cruel, especially to my own mother. And have you? I asked quietly. Understood it? He looked down at his coffee cup. I think I'd become someone I never intended to be. Kimberly and we got caught up in appearances, in status. Somewhere along the way, I started believing that success meant never looking back, never acknowledging where I came from. You were a reminder of a simpler life that didn't fit with who I thought I wanted to be. It wasn't a full explanation, nor a proper apology, but it was more insight than I'd expected. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of the son I'd raised, the boy who could acknowledge mistakes and try to learn from them. The rest stop wasn't an isolated incident, Franklin, I said carefully. It was the culmination of years of growing disrespect and distance. If we're going to have any kind of relationship moving forward, that has to change. He nodded slowly. I know. And I want to try. Losing my job, having to start over. It's been humbling. I've had to re-examine a lot of things, including how I've treated you. We talked for over an hour, setting tentative boundaries and expectations. I made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate being treated as an afterthought or an inconvenience. He acknowledged that rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort on his part. Kimberly remained a challenge. While Franklin had experienced genuine remorse, she viewed me primarily as the cause of their reduced circumstances. At family gatherings, now held in public places rather than their home, she was civil but cold, her politeness a thin veneer over lingering resentment. The children, surprisingly, were more adaptable. Without Kimberly's constant negative influence coloring their perception, James and Melissa began to respond to my sincere interest in their lives. Small gifts and attentive conversations slowly rebuilt bridges that their parents had burned. Grandma, Melissa asked during one visit to a local museum, why didn't we see you much before? The question caught me off guard. Well, everyone was very busy, I hedged, not wanting to place blame. Mom said you were interfering, she replied with the blunt honesty of a 10-year-old. But you don't seem interfering to me. People sometimes say things when they're frustrated, I said carefully. What matters is that we're spending time together now. The most unexpected development came through George and Martha, the couple who had rescued me from the rest stop. We'd kept in touch via email, and when they mentioned they'd be passing through my area during their spring travels, I invited them to stay with me. Their visit coincided with a family dinner I'd arranged at a local restaurant. Seeing them again, these kind strangers who had shown me such compassion when my own family had abandoned me, brought the whole experience full circle. You look so much better than the last time we saw you, Martha said, hugging me tightly. I am better, I replied. Stronger. I introduced them to Franklin and his family, watching my son's face as he came face to face with the people who had witnessed the aftermath of his cruelty. The shame in his eyes was palpable, but so was the effort to accept responsibility as he thanked them sincerely for helping me when he had failed to. We've continued to work on our relationship over these months. There have been setbacks, old patterns resurfacing, difficult conversations, moments when the hurt feels fresh again. We've started family therapy, a neutral ground where a compassionate professional helps us navigate the damage and find a path forward. I don't know if our relationship will ever fully heal. Some betrayals leave permanent scars. But I do know that standing up for myself, refusing to accept mistreatment, insisting on consequences, was the right choice, however painful. My life has expanded in unexpected ways since that day in the desert. I've grown closer to George and Martha, finding in them the supportive friendship I'd been missing. I've rediscovered old interests and developed new ones. I've learned that it's never too late to establish boundaries, to demand respect, to build a life that doesn't depend on those who don't value you. Sometimes the most important journeys aren't the ones we plan, like that ill-fated trip to the Grand Canyon, but the ones thrust upon us by circumstance. My journey from that desert rest stop led me not just home, but to a stronger, more authentic version of myself. If you're watching this and facing your own desert moment, that point where you must decide whether to accept mistreatment or stand up for yourself, I hope my story gives you courage. What was your turning point in setting boundaries with family? Share in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, Please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the family we build through friendship and mutual respect is as valuable as the one we're born into.